Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar on pirated software. Don't let software vendors make you walk the plank. So as you all registered, we asked a question. So what is your organization's greatest pirated software challenge? And the results have come through, and unsurprisingly, most people have selected identification or detection of pirated software in the estate, which is great. 20% have said policies and access, and this is from my perspective, one of the most important parts of mitigating the risk of pirated software, and we'll walk through that a little bit today. Tooling, which is great and also linked to the identification and detection. And then we had a handful of other responses that we've put in the other bucket. So without further ado, let's get started. And my goal today really is to promote awareness of this often unspoken about issue. And also to encourage everyone on the call to ask, are you sure you don't have any in your estate? This is a very serious topic that has a lot of nuances and should be treated with great sensitivity. While it can be a heavy topic, what has made me so interested in pirated software is that it hits at the heart of all software asset management or SAM programs and requires people from all areas of the business to come together and solve this serious problem. So during this webinar, I will explain what pirated software is, the risks, how it is possible to get into corporate networks and strategies that publishers are taking, and also best practices to mitigate the risk and protect your software environment. As we go through this, as Braden mentioned, please feel free to pop in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen any questions that you might have, and then we'll regroup them at the end of the session. So firstly, let's put pirated software into context. So many of us here today are part of SAM teams, and typically we spend our time comparing entitlements that you've paid for with consumption of what you're using. And we create effective license positions or ELPs to calculate potential cost savings where you're using less than what you've purchased, and potential financial risk when more licenses are used compared to what was bought, or where there is a breach of licensing terms and conditions. For those of you who may not know, Anglepoint is a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for IT asset management for 2 years in a row since they started doing a Magic Quadrant for ITAM. We deliver end-to-end managed services, starting with governance and processes, part of a program design that best works for your organization, which typically includes a publisher prioritization to determine which publishers with the highest spend and the highest audit risk, including the risk of audits from pirated software that should be actively monitored. And we take these publishers and include them in the scope of our managed services, where we deliver ELPs and what we call risk and opportunity assessment reports on a regular basis. Our tooling team implements and maintains a variety of SAM tools, such as Flexera, ServiceNow, Snow, and many others, to manage software inventory across the estate. And this is then used as a data source for ELPs and can also be leveraged as a source to help detect pirated software, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Alongside the ELP and raw work streams, we have an IT security team that supports with privacy and security compliance and works closely with our clients' InfoSec teams. Plus, we have an accredited training offering that delivers IA/ITAM certifications like CSAM, CHAMP, and publisher-specific trainings. And all these teams work alongside each other as part of our broader managed services, and pirated software sits at the center of all of these teams. So then a little bit about me. My background is similarly at the intersection of many different teams. I have bought and sold software. I've looked after technology procurement and contract processes, and even wrote some code while managing a high volume ticketing website built in the cloud. When I first joined Anglepoint, I was the global practice leader for specialty licensing, which includes non-top tier vendors such as VMware, Adobe, Quest, and Micro Focus. And it was in that role that I became an expert in engineering applications such as Dassault, PTC, and Autodesk, with a particular focus on pirated software. While this is a very specific topic, as I've mentioned, it integrates across all of the various work streams that forms part of a successful SAM program, and also requires the team from all areas across organizations to manage effectively, including SAM, legal, contract management, info security, the product owner, HR, and line management. I'm now in the customer success team and am responsible for delivering our largest managed services and helping improve our client SAM maturity. So if we take a step back and consider what is the core function of a SAM team philosophically, from my perspective, there are two primary goals. On the one hand, we are there to enable organizations and empower employees to do their jobs and do business. It could be Eric, who creates CAD drawings with photorealistic renderings for a new building, Kate, who is designing a sustainable bottle for a new range of kombucha in FMCG, Leo, who is building a robot to support patients in hospitals, Natalie, running simulations to determine the best use of space in a production line in a warehouse, or Bob out on an oil rig figuring out the best place to drill. It could even be Laura, an executive who needs Microsoft, Google, or even Lotus Notes to send out just one more email. We want to make sure that they all have the software they need when they need it to do their jobs, innovate, and make the economy go around. On the other hand, software asset management is here to protect. We review software environments to find all potential risks that could result in financial penalties during a software vendor audit. Because we find all the skeletons in the closet, we aren't always the favorite, but it is our duty to report on what we find and inform stakeholders of all the potential risks and advise next steps to remediate. It is ultimately up to the stakeholders to decide whether to accept that risk or to take on those actions, and then we would report them as realized cost savings in the next ELP. But today I will be talking about something different. Today we consider software that sits outside negotiated contracts and is an indisputable risk that organizations must address as quickly as possible when it is found. This is not something that can be ignored. So, what is pirated software? Pirated software is any software that was not purchased from legitimate sources or copying software when not legally authorized to do so. Any software not purchased from the software vendor directly or through an approved reseller, software downloaded from unauthorized websites on the black market, also known as cracked or counterfeit keys, and I will use these terms interchangeably during this webinar. This issue is widespread, and the Business Software Alliance, or BSA, is the leading advocate for global software industry and pioneers compliance programs that promote legal software use. This BSA conducts trainings and instigates enforcement cases to recover revenue for software vendors and releases global surveys on unlicensed software. Their global software study in 2018 found that 37% of software worldwide on PCs was unlicensed. Pirated software is illegal and considered a breach of contract terms and intellectual property. It can even be deemed a criminal act in certain jurisdictions, including in the US. So let's quickly visit how this issue has come about. So pirated software has existed since software was first created. The Software Copyright Act of 1980 in the US defined software as literary work, which essentially gave programmers the same rights as book authors, copyright ownership for the final work. Back in the early days, it was mostly large corporates who could afford and had access to computers and software. There were only a few individuals who were lucky enough to have access to computers, and as the software was so expensive, it could even have been more than the cost of the software itself. It became a hobby for some to create unauthorized versions of the legitimate software. Some would even trade floppy disks via mail to get their hands on it, for those of us who remember floppy disks. Later, during the 90s, peer-to-peer websites like Napster and BitTorrent decentralized access to file sharing, including counterfeit software, and did not leave a trace. Now, most of the time, people can access illegal software from commonly known pirated websites or through external hard drives or USBs. As more people are working from home, another consideration is that personal networks may not have the same level of security protocols as the typical corporate network. You might ask, why would people want to crack keys? Well, the answer might surprise you. While for some, it is about financial gain when selling counterfeit instead of legitimate software, for others, it's about being the first to recreate a particular license, and some release it before the official product is brought to market. Some also includes crowdsourced features that the vendor did not include as part of the genuine release. It's this status that allures people to want to access these versions of software, and is something we should be mindful of. More recently, we see software pirates create hundreds of new websites every day to counter the preventative measures that organizations are trying to implement, which should be a major concern for all companies due to the severe risks associated with these infringements. What have we learned in terms of the risks? And many of you who have directly experienced pirated software are probably aware of these risks. So they primarily fit into four groups: legal, security, financial, and reputation. So, as I mentioned earlier, the US was the first to legislate with the 1980 copyright law that specifies that copyright infringements can be punishable by up to 5 years in prison and $250,000 in fines. Repeat offenders can be imprisoned for up to 10 years, and violators can also be held civilly liable for actual damages, lost profits, or statutory damages up to $150,000 per work. The thinking is that software vendors have lost out on revenue that they would have received if the licenses were correctly purchased through legitimate sources, and therefore they have suffered a loss by not getting that revenue. In addition, some but not all contracts between clients and vendors include language that specifically govern the consequences if pirated software is identified in the environment. Often, there is no language in the contract, and this ambiguity means that vendors can take advantage and create their own calculation method for penalties. It is thought that for every one infringement case that goes to court, there are another 1,000 that are settled confidentially. One public example that did go to court is between Nike and Quest. Quest sent Nike a bill for $15.6 million in 2018, whereas Nike claimed they only owed Quest $350,000. Obviously, that's a big difference. Part of the reason for this large difference is because Quest created a methodology to calculate penalties, including back maintenance charged, interest applied, and a multiplier calculated for the alleged pirated software use. This was eventually settled out of court confidentially, and there were many elements to this case, of which piracy was one. Another example that went to court is Chetu in 2020. it was found that the US developer company had illegal copies of Microsoft, Adobe, and Quest software in 200 systems in India, and they were ordered to pay $40,000. Now, someone anonymously reported pirated software use at Chetu via the BSA website, who then alerted Microsoft, Adobe, and Quest, who then started an investigation. And this is an example of how the BSA essentially acts as a watchdog and an advocate for the software industry. Another consideration is reputation. When these allegations become public knowledge, there are broader ramifications. Firstly, other software vendors may start their own audit investigation if they suspect that this organization does not have a solid SAM program, and therefore there could be an opportunity to reclaim lost revenue because of non-compliance. In addition, it may make the organization's clients think twice about doing business with them if pirated software has been found in the organization's estate. If the software used to create deliverables for these clients is used with cracked keys, then you are starting to see the expanding security risk and legal liability onto those clients as well. From a financial perspective, we've already talked about examples for financial settlements, and the BSA estimates that malware from unlicensed software costs companies $359 billion per year. And that does not consider the cost of employees' time to deal with those audits or managed service providers to support. In addition, just think of the number of hours spent by InfoSec teams and lost productivity due to malware, viruses, and subpar features found in these cracked keys. Out of all of these, security concerns should be paramount. Obviously, being a cracked key, there is no support available from vendors if security patches are required. Often cracked versions are from many years ago, and BSA estimates there is a 1 in 3 chance of encountering malware when persons obtain or install unlicensed software, and then the software itself can infect other devices across the network. And that's not a risk any organization should be willing to take. So all publishers have the right to pursue infringements on their copyright where pirated software is discovered. Some publishers are more active compared to others. As I've mentioned, the BSA is the primary organization that supports software vendors pursue enforcement cases of pirated software, with more than 4,000 cases and 100 partners worldwide. Ultimately, though, audits, whether from piracy or from overconsumption, are a revenue-generating exercise. Many publishers have stated in their annual reports their strategic pursuit of revenue from audits with specified targets. Based on their website, BSA drives tens of millions of dollars per year in legalization sales. Since COVID, we have observed a higher number of audits as software vendors try to claim back lost revenues as a result of the economic downturn. In our experience, some of the most aggressive publishers when it comes to pirated software are Dassault, PTC, Autodesk, Quest, Micro Focus, and Adobe, but it is certainly not limited to them. Microsoft, for example, was a pioneer of pursuing pirated software for many years, and other smaller publishers like Hexagon, Siemens, and others are also active. One of these vendors had 30,000 active cases in Europe alone last year. Another audited a large technology firm and found 6,500 pirated installations out of a total 30,000 installs. And this was only based on internal usage, not even the managed service for their clients. With $120,000 per cracked key, this meant that it was potentially worth more than $500 million of pirated software. Obviously, this was negotiated down, but it gives you a sense of the value of these infringements for just one instance found, let alone when there are systemic issues discovered. We've also seen a number of examples where organizations have purchased licenses from resellers who have on-sold cracked keys or even had their own illegal license key generator. Some are known for pursuing historic infringements from more than 9 years ago and then charged a penalty multiplier for those past years. When vendors come with allegations of pirated infringements, it immediately impacts the relationship that organizations have with those vendors. Even if claims are disproven, it can sour the relationship, and then all of a sudden, all negotiation leverage that you may have is lost. While it is in publishers' best interest to stop instances of pirated software, they can also use it to their advantage. Some have been known to introduce third-party security firms to help stop this from happening. Others will force organizations into unfavorable contracts so they can reap the benefits for many years to come. Once an organization's name appears on the watch list, it is likely they will be closely monitored in the future. So how can publishers tell? Well, some publishers have what is called phone home technology, and this is embedded into the software itself and means that if an incorrectly licensed key is used, it then dials back and alerts the vendor. This is often used as a basis for a report with the alleged infringements and is sent to clients along with a purchase order for settlement. The agreement for vendors to use phone home technology is often included deep in the terms and conditions of the software use or on the public conditions of use on the vendor's website. Some vendors have built their own phone home technology tool, while others will outsource management to third parties. The challenge with phone home technology, as with most tools, is that it is not always accurate. When vendors give a version of these reports to organizations, typically it does not include all the information that is needed to enable them to identify the devices as belonging to their environment or to confirm the infringement. Vendors will claim that they cannot share full information due to privacy and GDPR, but essentially, if you're trying to work collaboratively to find it, then the question should be asked, how much more information will they be willing to give you? Other publishers rely upon individuals reporting cases of pirated software, partner with BSA, who offers a financial reward for dobbing in companies. These tip-offs can come from present or former employees or anyone who has suspicions. Many publishers also have on their website directly ways for people to anonymously report these cases. All of the normal triggers for an audit, such as decreasing revenue spend with the publisher, may lead to a conventional audit, reviewing overconsumption and non-compliance with terms and conditions. As soon as vendors get access to organization software environments, any instances of pirated software may also be discovered. So then, what are the best practices to prevent and mitigate the risk of pirated software in your environment? Anglepoint has developed an end-to-end approach combining people, process, and technology. An example flow includes identifying the potential infringement, analyzing the data, verifying if the potential infringement is indeed accurate and is not a false positive, before correctly removing the infringement, updating the blocked list, and then negotiating a settlement with the vendor if under audit. So people, process, and technology. Firstly, we need to consider people. The first step is to establish a cross-functional team to sponsor this framework and requires representatives from SAM, legal, info security, HR, the product owner, contract management, and it must have executive sponsorship. With this cross-functional team, the process and technology can be developed. With the exception of accidentally purchasing counterfeit licenses from resellers, it is a deliberate act for individuals to go to an unauthorized website and download a cracked key. It cannot be an accident, and vendors will state this. So when there are cases of infringements confirmed, it is important to find out from that individual what was the reason for accessing the cracked key. Was it perhaps education or lack of training? Was it that they requested the software via legitimate means and was rejected? Sometimes we've learned that the individual already had a genuine license for that software, but instead they preferred the cracked version and a colleague shared it around the team, which is why they were all using it. The second element is process. And here we have developed proactive and reactive processes to best manage pirated software. From a proactive perspective, we can break it down into a couple of elements. If we think back to the first goal of SAM, it is to enable. So we need to ensure that every piece of software comes through that formal approval process aligned with an approved software catalog. If that is the case, then all software can only be installed if it is from the approved catalog, of which pirated software obviously would not be included. This would also greatly reduce the need for employees to have admin rights. Now, we need to make sure that they have access to the software quickly and it's not a bureaucratic burden that could take months from request to approval, which should also dissuade individuals from accessing pirated software. We've had an experience where someone was out on an oil rig and they needed to get access to the licenses that they required, so they chose to access pirated key rather than going through the centralized corporate catalog. Written documentation that makes it clear to employees the consequences of pirated software is discovered on their devices. This should also be written into agreements with contractors and students to ensure that all pieces of work created by them are made with genuine software. We have seen instances of short-term workers or low-cost contractors who are low-cost in part because they have cut corners and used cracked versions of software to produce CAD drawings, for example. This then introduces risk to organizations. Sometimes it is embedded into the metadata of the drawings themselves. And so if the contractor creates the draft, then your organization builds on top of that drawing, which is then shared with your client, you've got a potential problem and assume liability and reputational damage. It's important to have the consequences spelled out in written documentation in policies and procedures so that if it is found, then you have the clear steps to take action as appropriate. InfoSecurity should have and maintain a list of blocked websites that cannot be accessed from corporate devices. It is important to note that with websites appearing on a daily basis, that it will always be difficult to prevent access to absolutely every pirated website that may exist. The key part is proactively checking the environment for potential infringements. Each publisher has a slightly different methodology for identifying pirated software, but I'll walk through some examples of how we check. Leveraging SAM tools as a starting point is important. However, often infringements may not be found in the tool itself. This can be because cracks are typically saved in non-standard file locations on the device, such as archive or OneDrive or Dropbox, or even in virtual machines, which adds another layer of complexity, both from a tooling perspective and to verify if the infringement indeed exists. Authorized software is usually saved in a folder entitled Applications. When SAM tools scan, sometimes they are set up only to scan a particular location, which could narrow the scope of the inventory scan, and therefore a particular, if the crack is not located there, it would not be picked up. Other SAM tools may scan everything. However, if, for example, there is an external drive and the dongle is not connected at the time of the scan, then it would also not be picked up. Even if the scan successfully includes the location of a cracked key, sometimes it cannot differentiate the cracked key from a genuine license key. This is because cracked keys are becoming increasingly sophisticated to mask and appear as authorized software. If absolutely all software was requested and available through the approved catalog and no one had admin rights to their devices, that would prevent employees from being able to download unapproved software. However, as I've mentioned, this is very rare in the industry, and operationally it's very difficult to achieve. Knowing this, we recommend regularly cross-checking installations found in the SAM tools against the approved software catalog, and where there are differences, it should prompt an investigation into the device. Apart from identifying potential infringements, this would also capture demand for software that is outside the approved catalog, but frequently installed to determine which software should be considered for packaging and adding to that catalog. For engineering applications, we run specific scripts, which is an enforced scan that looks at the entire device, including external drives that are connected at the time of the scan. This script includes registry files and install paths for the entire device, and we use this to collect both genuine consumption as a primary input for our ELPs, and then we can perform specialized analysis to identify potential cracked keys. Another red flag or suspicion is free or trial licenses that may have an expiry date many years into the future. Yes, while it may seem counterintuitive, indeed some people choose to crack free licenses. This may not make a whole lot of sense to us SAM professionals, but can happen where, for example, education licenses or free licenses may have a watermark, like AutoCAD, and then it can be cracked to remove this watermark. Another way we can identify potential pirated software is to look at the license keys and the issuer to make sure that they're following the standard pattern of a genuine key. Over the years, we have also compiled a database with known pirated keys that we cross-check against. Reactive processes include the steps that should be taken if a potential infringement is found, whether by internal means or if raised from the software vendor during an audit. The first step should always be to check and verify if the alleged pirated software is on the device, and we have experts who conduct this during the verification. It is very important to do this step because we have successfully disproven vendor allegations on multiple occasions in the past. Even the phone home technology is not bulletproof. After verification, there needs to be an agreed process to review with legal, HR, and remove the software, which is the last element in technology. Corrective processes should include a complete wipe of the device to ensure that all traces are removed. Any trace that can be found on the device can represent a potential risk to the organization, even if the pirated software is not used. Something else to keep in mind is that we have found instances of pirated software that has a licensed server key on the device. This means that the quantity could be 1,000 or higher of those licenses. Where cracked keys are found, typically it would include the entire catalog. So for example, standard, professional, enterprise, whatever editions are available through the genuine software. So then if you have the entire suite plus licensed server keys, so having the quantity of 1,000, for example, then you're looking at $100 million worth of potential financial risk that's found on, let's say, one device. Here, it is important to investigate with the individual, find out why they did it, make sure that there is a complete wipe of the device, and take any other corrective actions needed, such as appropriate HR discipline. In conclusion, pirated software has very serious legal, financial, security, and reputation risks, and is increasingly the focus of audits that software vendors can detect via phone home technology as they try to reclaim lost revenue. Anglepoint can support by implementing a best practice governance framework, including having highly specialized analysis to proactively identify pirated software and ensure it is completely removed. It is important to have that governance framework, not just to address and minimize the risk of pirated software, but as the root cause of the problem of finding pirated software in the estate. It hits the core of what a best practice SAM program should look like from the very beginning, which is the software request process, and making sure that investments are made by organizations to package the software required by the employees to enable them to do the work and do business every day. We have demonstrated experience, including disproving multiple vendor allegations of pirated software. It is incredibly important that while vendors may come with a list of allegations and likely a large sum of money in the form of a purchase order, that these allegations are proven before considering making a settlement payment. One of our clients paid $8.4 million worth of allegations in pirated software in 4 years. They engaged us to verify the claims and develop a process from preventing this from ever happening again. Within 1 year of implementing this new framework, the client paid $0 to the publisher. And the reason for this was that the publisher was unable to provide the evidence required to correctly identify the devices with infringements as belonging to the client's estate. And then there were false positives identified through the phone home technology, as when we did or applied our specialized analysis, we disproved their allegations as there was no pirated software found on that device. This is a very serious issue, and there are a few people in this world who have this capability and who work with clients to proactively prevent this from happening in the first place. Anglepoint is here to be that proactive partner to find infringements and develop processes that work for your organization and provide support where instances of pirated software are unfortunately found in the estate. While this might be a reactive prompt for organizations to give us a call in the event of a publisher sending a letter with an audit of allegations, it is important that this comes to the root of an entire best practice SAM program, and that is where we should start. As our responsibility is to enable and protect, we're on hand to create those efficient software request processes to make sure employees have the software that they need when they need it, and they don't have access to software that they do not require, whether that be through reclamation processes or pirated software. We develop best practice policies and procedures and protect organizations by taking the proactive, reactive, and corrective measures when it comes to pirated software. Now we all know how widespread pirated software is, and so we should assume that pirated software exists somewhere in the estate until it can be proven otherwise. So I hope you have found this helpful and informative today, and we've left about 15 minutes to go through any questions that have been raised. So if you've not asked any questions already in the Q&A box down below, please feel free to do so now, and I will go through them. All right, let's have a look. Okay. So the first question that has come through is, it's more of a statement, I suppose. Our employees are good people. They would never do this. And you know what? Yes, we always like to think that people are inherently good, and as employees, we would want to do right by the company, and for ourselves, right? Um, and this is why it's important to treat this topic sensitively, and with urgency. It is also why we would refer to infringements as potential infringements or as allegations until the experts can verify, because false positives are possible. And as I've mentioned, we have successfully disproven allegations that have come from vendors themselves. Their tools aren't bulletproof, and if in the case of the client that I mentioned earlier, organizations just pay as soon as a purchase order comes through with that list of allegations, well, that might not be true or fair, which is why we need to verify that that is indeed the case, before making accusations and before paying money to the publishers. Now, there are many reasons why people might want to access cracked keys, and so we shouldn't make assumptions about that either, before speaking to the individual. It could be perhaps that they didn't know how to request the software through the catalog, or perhaps that their request was rejected for some reason. But it also could just be because they prefer the cracked version of the software because they tend to have different features than what is in the genuine version. And this is because as they branch off, in particular from older versions of the software, some pirates may choose to add crowdsourced or requested features from that community. So yes, always assume that employees are good people, but the reality is that sometimes they do this, and in almost all cases, once an infringement has been confirmed and there is that conversation with the individual, they admit that they knew they weren't doing the right thing. So it is a deliberate act, but indeed important to treat this topic with sensitivity. Okay. So another question's come through, where does this happen? It would not happen in America or Europe. Surely this is restricted to a particular area. So it is true that in different regions of the world, culturally, there is a different level of respect for copyright. And in America, there is a higher respect for copyright that's owned by various owners. So while this might be true, actually, the BSA estimates that 57% of software in the Asia Pacific region is unlicensed, and that's where we find that copyright laws traditionally have had less force. And it is more difficult in a legal sense to pursue copyright infringement in those areas because the legislation is less strong as in other parts of the world. So it is important to keep in mind that infringements are found globally, including in America, Europe, Africa, South America, and in our experience, pirated software allegations can be issued to organizations' headquarters, so it's a global audit or a global list of allegations. But sometimes it also goes direct to a country level or to a local business level if those organizations are very decentralized. So part of our role, if you're in a global SAM team, is to educate individuals and employees across the world, but also to educate local SAM teams that may exist to make sure that if there are any allegations or any audits in general, that they notify the global and central SAM team and or us if we're engaged as a managed service provider, and we can help them navigate that process. Okay, another question. We have moved to a subscription licensing model, so there is no reason to use cracked keys, I would assume. So here, while perpetual licenses have been associated with pirated software in the past, there is no dependency between the authorized and legitimate software that companies would purchase and the use of pirated versions. It is incredibly common in our experience that when we find individuals with pirated software, that they also have the genuine software installed on their devices. So that's not always the reason that they don't or that they choose to have cracked keys. And it's also good to keep in mind that unauthorized software is outside the terms and conditions, usually, of the negotiated contract. And so even if you have a subscription licensing model, there's no dependency, there's no reason or option preventing people to use cracked keys if they already have access to a subscription license. That's not always the blocker. Okay. So then someone else has asked here that is this not why does this sit under SAM rather than InfoSec? And they have and maintain a list, a blocked list that should prevent people from accessing it. Good question. And this is an assumption that is made that if security has processes in place to prevent unsavory websites, then it shouldn't be possible to access these forms of pirated software. So certainly InfoSec has a very important role to play, and they absolutely should have access or should have these processes set up, and likely do have these processes set up. Every day, hackers are creating new websites with different keywords to actively get around those measures, and are finding different ways, more creative ways, to try to get around these processes that organizations have in place. But because every day there's something new that appears and every day there are different keywords, it is impossible to block everything. And as a SAM function, we should already be working closely with security teams, with legal and contract management. And so this is why we should all be working together. Any issues that are found by security are referred to the SAM team so we can help investigate and apply the specialized analysis to verify if they were successful in accessing any pirated websites and have downloaded a cracked key, but also that we're sharing information back to the InfoSec team. So if we find any instances of cracked keys, either from vendor allegations or through the proactive processes, if we're running our scripts and performing this analysis, that we're then sharing that information back to the InfoSec team so they can add that to their blocked list and prevent people from accessing it in the future. All right, so they're all the questions that have come through. I hope you found that helpful and interesting. Of course, if you think of any other questions after the website, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'd be happy to have a call and talk to you about any of your concerns or experiences in the past. Each of these tend to be individual and have a story behind it, and we're always here to learn and to help where we can. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.